Thanks for tuning in to Gin and Tantra, Spirituality with a Twist. You've got Daniel driving the ship today, so we are definitely going to crash this motherfucker, just letting you know right out the gate. We are joined today by a friend of the show, friend of mine, and of Eric's as well, Christian Villacres, who has been with us before. And Christian and I run a men's group together, and we do this on a month. We have meetings on a monthly basis, and we do like kind of annual retreats, although that might increase or decrease depending on how life presents itself. So Christian, say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today, or thanks for joining me. I'm speaking in like a third person plural, which is strange, you know.
We are all we.
We, yes, we also French too.
Oh,
Um,
thank you for having.
yeah, of course. Thanks for sharing. I mean, and so really this episode was inspired by a conversation that Christian, that you and I had about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago. I'll give the background a little bit. So when one of the guys in our men's group, shout out to Chris Buds, who's a tattoo artist, came over to my house and was touching up some ink of mine. And Christian was there. We were kind of workshopping our men's group and where we are looking to go as a collective. Like, how can we codify what we're doing and make it a little bit more streamlined for us, as it's been a very organic thing, I think, is if I could say.
Yeah, it's just been very fluid and experimental. And I think just moving forward is very naturally, we want to sort of consolidate our energy and really make sure that we're focused on accomplishing the mission that we have. And I think, just very naturally, it took a little bit of time to feel through what feels good for us as a group and where we want to position ourselves.
Yeah. So even though we're doing this as a expose on our men's group, what we're going to talk about today is absolutely not related in any way, shape, or form specifically to our men's group. So our 55% female audience don't turn off just because we're talking about the men's group. Actually, what we're talking about is something that we probably have been doing in our practices. At least I have been doing in my practice, and you have shared you've been doing in your practice. I have been doing it intentionally, but without understanding. And so we're having this conversation as my friend is kind of touching up my tattoo. And Christian, we were asking one of our friends who was there, what do you like about the group? And he had mentioned the talking part. So when we get together, we share a little bit. We may have an activity, but we share. A lot of what we're doing is sharing. And Christian immediately said, thank you for sharing. That is not what I want. I do not want that kind of a group. And I said immediately, well, what do you want? And then Christian, and I'll let you illuminate a little bit, brought up this idea of catharsis versus cultivation. And that's going to be the topic of our conversation today, or roughly around that. This idea that people come in to a therapy situation, or we'll just call it a sharing situation, right? And that the focus is continually on a cathartic experiment, on rehashing things that have been in their life over and over and over again, without much prodding for further reflection in order to turn the corner and to begin to cultivate from those experiences. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that
Yeah,
just
well, I
a
think
bit, or
so.
what would you
Very
say?
simply, it just kind of came down to, the a therapeutic space versus a different kind of productive space. And when I first started, before we even formed the men's group, and I started researching about different types of men groups, what kind of men groups exist, what are their goals, what are their practices and habits, what are their values and their culture that they embody. One of the first things that came up was just an acknowledgement that there are a variety of groups, and one of the main kind is a therapeutic space.
Sure.
It's a therapeutic group where, if we're talking just about men's groups here, where men can come together and share the difficult things that they're that are going on in their lives, and feel a sense of camaraderie as they get to de-stress themselves, get positive feedback from the people around them, and literally have the opportunity to be quote unquote seen and heard. And I think you and I can, as clinicians, can both obviously understand the value of that, and the importance of having spaces where you can feel safe unloading and unburdening yourself and going through that process of emptying your cup that is
Yeah.
mostly full of stress, right?
Yes.
And I think I want to set that kind of context for treating ourselves as vessels and what our vessel is full of. And I think what I'm sure all of us observe is that many of our cups are full are inundated with stressful or toxic energies. And going into spaces that are quote unquote therapeutic, where we can release that, feels really good. The problem that I have with that long term, as we're trying to build a group that is really benefiting its members, is that if all you're doing is emptying your cup without really being able to refill it in a mindful and intentional way through steady practices, then we're always going to be in a situation where we empty our cup, feel really good, and go right back out into the world and get, again, sort of blasted in the face with honking horns, stressed out people, bills, children, everything we got to deal with. And then we're just kind of stuck in this cycle of fill and release, fill and release. And, from a clinical perspective, that works really well to keep the lights on, and it keeps you in business
Mm,
because you allow people a space to come in and feel temporarily better. And that is a treatment in a lot of ways. You give people an opportunity to unburden themselves, to feel more energetically balanced and relaxed, right? But without giving them the tools and the practices and the structures to make themselves more resilient to the things that were previously burdening them, then they're just set up in a subscription model, basically, of
mm,
coming back in.
yeah.
So, to the men's group, then, when our buddy mentioned, this thing about liking the being able to share what's going on and doing the talking, my adamant response that, like, that's not the kind of group I want to have, is was driven from this feeling that that's a lot of what we've been doing, is providing a space for people to share their feelings, to share their stories, which has allowed for a certain amount of bonding.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, that's not going to get us anywhere. Um, and it's not going to benefit us in the way that it will then spread out and benefit our families and then benefit our communities. I think what in order to really benefit ourselves and our communities, we have to establish a sense of values and practices that go together to continue to generate us.
Mm, mm. So I'm gonna just before we continue, I'm gonna circle back just a half 180 here real quick. And just to stand up for what you said in the beginning, which was it's important to understand how to create a safe kind of container space for people to share. So one of the things that we learned in school, we took these classes called clinical counseling, which is a counseling class for clinicians, because inevitably, as people who are clinicians, we talk about this. Christian, you have patients, I have patients, Eric has patients. But if we even go more kind of mundane, because most people who listen to this podcast are not practitioners, that's just what it is, but they're people. Let's just say engaging in a mindful conversation where people are sharing things with vulnerability and depth is to be able to listen compassionately to somebody and provide them with the space, if it's appropriate, for them to provide what is a very important aspect of the healing process. Probably the first step, really, which is known as like sharing your healing narrative, your healing story, your healing journey, if you will. And this is important because it puts your experience of your life not necessarily in order, but in prioritization as the things that have impacted you,
Mhm.
right? And so it's important to highlight these because these are the things ultimately that really shape who you are. You know, of course we could have particular practices, but for most people who are not on a path of self-cultivation, which is what we're going to eventually get to, they are living their lives as people who are building careers, looking for partners, having families, you know, responsibilities and so forth, but they are hit with various traumas. And what is a trauma to one person might not be traumatic to another, vice versa. But if somebody felt influenced by some situation, then that thing was influential for them. And so we have to be able to provide a space as clinicians or as friends, right? Or as lovers or family members, whatever, if we want to get into these kinds of things, to let them do their work, let them express themselves in a narrative that is clean and cohesive for them. The more work they've done, the clearer this narrative will sound. So this is first, just to say that part. But then moving forward to where you are going, if I believe, you know, I'm clear with what you're saying, and so our audience is clear also, you're saying that has value, full stop. But that if that is all that you are doing, is providing the narrative, then you take whatever it is that your cup is and you empty it, and then you go back in the world and you refill it without having any filtration system as to what you put back in. It just gets filled back up, and then you come back in a week or 2 weeks later, and then you empty it out again, and then it gets filled back up. And in no kind of certain terms are you really engaging with your life to decide, what do I want to put in my cup and what do I want to leave out?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to who's in charge of the narrative. And I think, you know, that I talk about the narrative of one's life every day with my clients.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to encourage people to embrace is, you know, writing their own hero's journey,
Yeah.
creating creating an intentional narrative around the mythology of their own existence, about why they came into being in the first place, and why the story was written in such a way so that they could have these experiences and for what reason. And I think part of our jobs, if we transcend just treatment, is helping people take their debilitating traumas that frequently stagnate them and then distort their outlook and their and what they can accomplish, and turn those events into the sort of positive cataclysms in their life that lead them to evolve to their higher selves. And then once they are able to merge with or transform through that, then they become guides and healers for those potentially that have suffered similar things, because part of the cycle is to transition yourself out of a victim of your own narrative, out of a victim of the things that are filling your cup, and becoming, again, the writer of your own story, the hero of your journey, and owning that mythology. And so, and I think, you know, that's, if it comes down to this idea of catharsis and cultivation, for me, a lot of it comes back down to feeling victimized and feeling empowered. And for when we've been victimized, I think naturally it feels good to validate the pain that we've been through, and then feel the release of letting it go. I've just, you know, I've seen so many times in clinical practice, though, how the sweetness of that relief doesn't have this, or it has more appeal than the mundane, boring parts of actually changing yourself so that you don't end up going through the same patterns again.
So I have, you know, we do these retreats with Remy and Ashley, who have been on the podcast before, whom Christian knows from, you know, real life and working with them. Of course, outside of the country where these things are legal and totally no issues whatsoever. Just in case I decide to run for Congress, Christian, it's not a 0% chance. I am fired up about many things politically that I'm not going to talk about, but let's just say your boy might be starting to raise funds at some point. I don't know. Anyways, moving on.
I might vote for you.
Okay, sweet. Thank you. I got one. Sweet. You and my mom, but she's got to move back here. So, but Congress people can be crazier because they don't have to get the whole state. They only got to get like a small area. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, um, so we're doing this, we do retreats, and we've talked about this before. Kumankaya, shout outs to Remy and Ashley, like I just said a second ago. But she left a voice message for one of our dear friends who we shall not name because she'll be listening to this at some point. I don't want her to feel off put. But basically, one of our mutual friends is not going to come with us to the next retreat because she feels really good. She's like, I don't think I need the medicine right now. I feel really good in life. And she said, but what I feel, I don't want to miss out. So tell me what I should do, Guru Ashley. And Ashley really is, she's just such a sweet, anyways, good lady, man. I really love her. But she said the work is the integration. That's the work. And if you're in a good mood and you're in a good space in your life, that is the medicine working. That's the work, is the integration part. And so you can go have an experience on a psychedelic or on a retreat or wherever the case is, but ultimately the movement is back towards your life. And this is what we're talking about essentially, is the integration of our experiences in a way that Gabor Mate puts it, that the lessons of your life become your teachers. And I often talk about like having your life as your guru,
Sure.
And if you can do that, and then like you're saying, I'm calling it the conscious author. If you can then do that and accept that, like, yes, for sure, we have all had things that were done to us without our permission, and hell, without even our knowing that they were being done.
Exactly.
And some of it is worse for others. You and I are I don't want to say fortunate enough, but we are straight males in this lifetime. You know what I'm saying? So I have an inherently different experience than a gay male or a trans male or a female or all the other, all the various gender that they're out there that people identify with. I don't have those things. And they don't have my things. My things are not more or less than anybody else's, but they're mine. They're mine. And if I can at some point, and again, this is in no way belittling someone's experience, I have to be an author of my own, like you are saying. I have to feel empowered by the things that have made me because I survived them. They didn't take my life,
Well, I mean, from what I've seen, one of the hardest parts about being the real author of your life and living your narrative from an empowered perspective is doing the shadow work that comes before being able to own the more unsavory parts of yourself and
Sure.
transform through the more unsavory parts of yourself. What are the things that block us from facing our shadows? And until we are able to face our shadows and the things that we feel ashamed about, we're not going to be able to change the behaviors that continue to put us into less undesirable outcomes. I work with quite a few people going through different stages of recovery, and witnessing and being with people as they're processing their addictions has made me very sensitive and attuned to my own, dare I say, like micro addictions.
Mm.
I don't have anything in my life that keeps me from functioning and operating and, really being, I guess what I would say, not addicted, but what I observe is that we all have discomfort, and when we come face to face with discomfort, we look for a way out, and we look for a way out either through food or through alcohol or through pornography or through online shopping or whatever it is it might be, that helps us not sit with our discomfort. Um, so I think a big part of, again, like this idea of cultivation and catharsis, or even as we're saying, like, therapy and coaching, is actively getting people to a place which is very sensitive and very tender, to get to
Yeah.
a place where they can sit with the things that they're ashamed of, either things that they've done or that have been done to them, or the complex weaving of how even those two things go together, um, so that they can come out the other side and, feel non-dual. I
Mm.
mean, weave in their front-facing self with the parts of their self that they're ashamed of, and then that's where their power comes from. And I have not witnessed And that's not to say that this is a universally true statement,
Sure.
but I've witnessed a lot of frustration being in the holistic field and working with patients in a holistic way. I've witnessed a lot of frustration in the field of conventional therapy, in that it doesn't really do much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, and I just want to say straight up, I love therapy. And I've been in some form of therapy basically since I was 15 on and off. And my therapist now, I talk to every 2 to 3 weeks, and I've been with him for 5 years. At this point, I maintain a relationship with him just in case, you know? And so that way, and but I don't know if he's going to listen to this, but one of my main frustrations with my therapist is and has always been that he doesn't really do shit, you know? I go into that. He's like, I go in and with my background and my education and my experience and the depth work that I've done on myself, hold therapeutic space for myself with my therapist. And, we do it together, but he's never been, and I don't think he's a bad therapist. I just don't always know if this is how people operate once they're comfortable in their practices. I always wanted him to give me more. I wanted him to help me figure out my mind. I wanted him to help me figure out my inner workings so that I could, dissect why I was the way that I was, so that I could get myself out of these uncomfortable situations I kept putting myself in. And the psychoanalytic route, at least, it didn't really do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
It did when I did it to myself, with the assistance of spiritual practices and plant medicines and just a lot of deep one-on-one time. But that's the kind of work that I think, we need to be able to usher people into so they can have sustainable transformative experiences and not just regularly scheduled catharsis while they go in and out of stress patterns.
Mm. Um, so I talked about this before we started recording. Now is a good time to bring it up. So there are different kinds of therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just gonna run through them really quickly because you had mentioned one in particular, and I think those are the two maybe we can kind of zoom in on. But one is cognitive behavioral therapy, and then they call or known as CBT. This one, um, the psychologists study the patient's patterns of thinking and kind of gain an understanding to this origins. And once identified, the psychologists can work to combat thought patterns that are causing emotional harm, focusing on developing and coping mechanisms that will help patients deal with issues as they arise long term. So they give you kind of pattern things to do to repattern your behavior, right? So that's one kind. The second one, and there's five, so people don't fall asleep just yet. The second one is psychodynamic therapy. This one focuses more on self-awareness and self-examination. So maybe we could say it's a little bit more meditative in a sense from an internal perspective. Um, People guide patients towards identifying the root cause of their suffering or any kind of um, problematic relationships, we'll say. Let's see what else. They want to help their patients to form a practical and positive sense of self. The third one is what's known as humanistic therapy. Now, this one I'm least familiar with. This focuses on a patient's worldview and affects their everyday choices. It deals with unraveling one's what they call "quote unquote" true self, processing others' criticism, which you had mentioned previously. If you want to talk about that work with your client, that'd be cool. And realizing self-acceptance. It's slightly different than the one we just mentioned because it talks about people's more daily life, and so it's a little bit more practical in its application. And the last two that are probably more interesting for us, these are the psychoanalytic therapy. This deals with the understanding of the subconscious mind. This is probably more of your like Jungian
Mm-hmm.
subconscious analysis, which Eric and I have talked about quite a bit on here. We've talked a lot about one of our favorite Carls, Carl Jung. There's also Carl Rogers, whom we love. This type of therapy is best fit for those who have undergone therapy for a long time and want to go deeper in their understanding of the unconscious and how that kind of affects them. They say this is good for people who have compulsions, obsessions, phobias, or addictions. But I don't know about that. I think it's people who want to go a little bit deeper. And the last one, and then I'll say one thing about this in general. The last one, which is probably what you and I do most regularly, which is holistic therapy or integrative therapy. And this is an integrative approach to counseling, which based on principles of they call it psychosynthesis, and this deals with an understanding of the relationship between the mind, body, and spirit, and how it addresses how one of these aspects can affect our lifestyles in many areas. And it exposes the practitioner to a greater sense of awareness for the self and for the patient and for the environment, your local environment and the greater environment, which will help a greater sense of acceptance for yourself and the people who you work with. And this gives people a sense of a window into their conscious and their subconscious as well. What I want to say with all of that, as just background, because we like to give a little bit of technical information, is that when working with a therapist, whether it be in psychology, like how you have one, or whether it be working with people like us or whomever, you do have to interview your therapist, your practitioner, to understand where they're coming from. And so after I've had this conversation with you, I have actually gone and had this conversation that you and I are having right now with many of my patients, so that they can understand where it is that I want to come from. And I just had a new patient call me yesterday. She'll be coming in this coming week. And I told her, listen, there is what we call catharsis and what we're calling cultivation. I am on the cultivation side. I will help you with the first part, but then I am going to inherently move you towards a greater sense of empowerment in your life. I am in no way dismissing what you have experienced. I'm actually embracing it as part of who you are, but I'm not identifying who you were. I'm helping you move towards who you want to be. And in this way, this is how I am working. I think for many years, I did this without the awareness that I was doing it. I knew what I was doing, but I didn't have that kind of like light, the flashlight that was clicked on. In our conversation the other day really illuminated that for me. And now I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to let people know this is what I'm doing. And if the answer is yes, then when you come to me, you will understand where we are walking, and you are going to say yes to that, as opposed to people who may show up to me or in conversations with some of their friends or therapists or whatever, and they want the cathartic aspect. And I'm like, yes, but that can seem very dismissive. And so I wanted to make that distinction for my patients, for you to say thank you on a public forum, and for our listeners and audience members to understand that, like, when you enter into a contract, whether it be verbal or financial, with a practitioner or with just a friend who's holding space for you, make sure you understand where they are coming from so that you can get the most out of that interaction. So if you are looking for more of a Jungian analysis of your subconscious and unconscious, then it's not that your therapist is not good or bad. He's just not the right flavor for your coffee at this particular time.
Well, so I went to my therapist in particular because he mentioned Jungian archetypes in his website profile.
Oh man, it's a catfish, bro.
Um, so I took a note down as you were going through all of the different types of, as you're going through all the different types of stuff, I wrote down, you see the world as you see yourself. And this is something that comes up a lot with my more resistant clients, my clients who are more aggressively committed to their negative worldview.
Yes.
I work with a few people who have, I guess, fairly dire perspectives on how the world outcome might be over the next 5 to 50 years, and very heavily committed into these just negative perspectives. And it always comes up, you're projecting onto yourself or onto the world the insecurities and the fears that you have within yourself about your own ability to succeed, and your own ability to have value and meaning in the world. So, when I hear about the humanistic side, that's what comes up, is you're trying to get people to realize you see the world as you see yourself, and let's now progress into why you see yourself the way that you do. And I guess that gets deeper into the psychoanalytic and the holistic approaches to therapy. And I think, it's funny, we've maybe part of the incompleteness of all of these therapeutic styles is that they've been reductively labeled into their individual categories instead of lumped into one holistic experience. Ironically, being one of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you kind of have to go through all of them. You have to go through all of them in order to come out, I think, the other side. And then it's just kind of part of the nature of our medical system, right? We live in a world of specialists and we bounce from
Mm-hmm.
specialist to specialist, and our specialists don't even communicate with one another sometimes. Um, and I think that's where a funny place where some people like you and I might come in, where we're specialists and that we're acupuncturists, but we're generalists and that we have to take care of everything and anything that might come in through our doors with our very simple tools, with our very simple yet very effective tools.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, your own healing journey precedes the healing work that you do for others, I think is why you're naturally driven to
Yes.
not just help people feel better, but actually help them grow because you want to give to others what you did for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is what I want to do. And that's a lineage of healing. Like
Mm.
I know what's worked for me and I want to help to pass that on to you. I know not all of it's going to work, but like I'm going to give you everything I can from my path until you can figure out your own path and then you can set you free into the world, and um I like to imagine all of our existence sort of idealistically as each one of us is just lighting the candle for the person next to us so that eventually the whole world is just one big fireball of
Mm.
love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean this idea of you see the world as you see yourself, and then why do we see ourselves the way that we do? And what kind of work does it take to not write off the story that came before. It's like not like yes, but yes, and
And yeah.
because it's recontextualizing the story that came before, um, and using it to make meaning in your life. I think where a lot of the therapeutic styles fall short, except for maybe like the last one that you mentioned, the holistic one, is that a lot of them don't really give any context for what life even is, and it gives no sense of groundedness for life after death, which I think ultimately is what almost all humans are afraid of, whether they can really verbalize it that way or another, right? We're all experiencing the finality of our own existence and the urgency to live to our fullest, and the anxiety that we can't live to our fullest with the short time that we have, and that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So I, really do think a lot of where conventional, I don't want to use that word, but where therapies fall short is that that doesn't say anything about the spiritual, about spiritual possibility, or it doesn't provide a lot of guidance to understand what life could be, I guess,
Sure.
and maybe this is my own bias because for me the mysteries give me peace.
Mm.
And I know that's not everyone, but that's definitely me. The mysteries give me a lot of peace and make me fear or make the urgency of life feel less intense because the finality seems less determined.
Mm.
Um, and understanding that and embracing that in my own healing path has allowed me to um, reassess the difficult things that I've experienced and put them into context that's removed the suffering and like the baggage, but integrated hopefully some of the wisdom from those experiences.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's alchemy, right? In a sense,
Yeah.
that's the changing from lead to gold. And I think on a gross level, maybe people have heard these stories before, these, alchemists from, or even the book, The Alchemist, which is great. I probably read that book like 4 times, it just, so anyways, becoming the author of your own story is totally, The Alchemist.
I mean, I read that book so many times when I was in high school and then again later in college, and no doubt it influenced the words that I'm saying to you right now, for sure.
Totally. And the alchemist were people who wanted to who were supposedly be able to turn lead, an innate substance, into gold, which is the most valuable substance still on the planet. I know platinum and whatever lithium or something. Okay, I get it. I'm relatively speaking, gold is
Yeah.
a standard. You know what I'm saying?
Highly conductive.
Yes, yes, in many ways.
Yes.
Especially for the Anunnaki. Not just kidding. They didn't need that.
Shout out.
Shout out to Anunnaki, what it is, you know.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, no, you're good. But it's an internal process as well. And the alchemist is one who can take this sort of like substance that is an afterthought, lead, right? That is literally poisonous to the body, is good for a paperweight, doesn't burn, is a byproduct of other chemical reactions, and to turn basically like what we're considering one of the most useless substance, a poisonous substance, and turn that into the most valuable substance. So you're talking about the most polarized opposites. I'm not going to say yin and yang because one is not so useful, but a yin is very useful as opposed to yang or whatever. But to go from something that is innate and poisonous to something that is highly valuable, the transformation from one to the other is the work of the alchemist. That is the work of someone who, what we're talking about, that is the work. And when we reference the work, this is the work. You know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
what we are trying, and what you have so eloquently, stated, is that like that's the important part. When I talk about integration, that is the important part. These poisonous or these afterthoughts, these echoes or shadows of experience that we all have, and again, some louder and more intense than others, are still ours to deal with, regardless of how they got there. And we have compassion for those people, you know what I'm saying, who have deeper shit than I do, But it,
You mentioned Gabor Mate
yeah,
earlier, right? And
yes, yes,
you obviously know, and I'm sure many people who are listening know the book The Body Keeps the Score, right?
yep,
And the very simple idea, but very profound and I think very real observation that whatever you experience, positive or negative, let's say the after effects of that are stored within your system, and compounding that, the lack of expression of the things that are stuck in your system continue to make them fester and become even more putrid.
sure,
I think the healing journey, the alchemical healing journey for all of us is to transform all the negative energies and emotions that are stuck inside of our bodies for the sake of opening clear flow of energy and vitality through our systems so that we can experience our own version of enlightenment. And I think
sure.
you and I probably at our highest, at our highest mission as we're working with anyone is to help facilitate their own enlightenment as a
Yes,
journey of our own enlightenment.
yeah, yeah. That's
Right?
the
And so for
bodhisattva,
all of
the
our
vow of the
patients,
bodhisattva.
yeah, so for all of the people we work with, it seems like, you know, we are trying to help them become their own alchemist.
Yes,
And part of that is the catharsis because many of the cathartic much of the catharsis, at least that I've experienced from my practices and many practices that you've shared with me, um, when you start to build the fire in the body that drives the alchemical process, it starts to release things right there.
yeah,
Just starting to build the fire gives the experience of catharsis. The problem that I've witnessed is that a lot of people get stuck in doing that fire building cathartic experience. You might even call it, like I don't want to call it Kundalini because I don't think it actually is fully activated Kundalini. I think it's reckless Kundalini that's just kind of shooting around. Um, but they have a harder time transitioning to I'm not an expert in this, but I'll just say into like higher chakra activation, or different emotional vibratory state activation because they'll stay stuck in the lower centers.
mm,
Um, I struggle with mentioning the chakras right now because in my own studies of them, I recognize how little I know, and the more I know, the more I recognize how little I know.
mm,
And I understand that, all functionally, I've attributed, as many people have, emotions to the different energy centers of the body. How accurate that is to the classics, I don't want to say. But for at least a functional model for people that I've worked with, um, I gave them the idea that fear lives in the lower belly, and that when there's a deep constriction of fear that's experienced, or a deep fear that's experienced early in life, then a strong constriction can take place down in the lower belly of the body. And these fears are hard to tap into when we're adults, and hard to identify and hard to let go of, because for whatever reason, maybe it's just geographical with our heads up here, we're fairly disconnected from our pelvic floors. I'm sure you've experienced lots of patients who tell you, I carry my stress in my shoulders, right? And a functional phrase I've said to people is, you carry your stress in your shoulders, you carry your fear in your pelvis, and your stress is a result of what you're afraid of.
Mm.
Um, Now, whether or not that's diagnostically true, who knows, right? But it's functional in
Yeah,
terms of developing awareness over your thought processes, and then understanding that I need to get deeper inside of myself.
sure.
I'm gonna feel better.
So there's a couple things here that I want to make sure that I mention. So first, we're talking about like traumas that happen to people, and then there are somatizations of those. So the body keeping the score in this case, which is from an individualistic perspective, true in the way that we are aware of it. There also is the societal aspect that we have been talking about last year, and then also more recently, from the work of Wilhelm Reich, mentioning the emotional plague and this kind of societal imprints, familial imprints placed upon the being, us in this case, me, you, and the listener, that creates this false self, right? So this is one idea. We have this sort of false self, which is not the true, authentic self that we are, right? And then in addition, you have these things that get stored within us that then create echoes, or forward moving echoes in time of these previous things. So we have a false self, one from the imprints of society, and then we have these experiences that could be passed down. I've told this story before about some woman who I had met on a blind date, whatever, but I ended up doing some work on her, and I put my hands on her abdomen, and I saw this, very difficult scene of a elderly gentleman, basically coercing pulling the fire alarm, coercing a young girl that was like probably 8th grade, maybe, or freshman, into his car, driving her to a quote unquote safe place, and then molesting her basically. And when I told this girl what I saw, she immediately called her mom, and her mom said that happened to her. That happened to her mom when her mom was in 8th grade, way back when. And I felt that as like a little nodule, a little ball in this woman's lower pelvis. So she inherited that, and that was residing within her. You know what I'm saying? So there are just other things that we carry around with us, but all of this to say, and we're using this word a lot recently, is that the emancipation of yourself from these things, from these stories, from these objects, from these ideas, from these echoes, from our false self, from our experiences, gives us a more accurate sense of who we are as a being. It's not the elimination of those things, it's not erasing them. It's the freedom of being able to decide how they're going to affect you moving forward. And for me, this is the transformation of lead into gold, by saying, yes, that happened. Yes, that's poisonous. That doesn't have much value for me. It is lead. And lead is making me heavy, and lead is poisoning me, just like it does when it was in the paint. I don't care what any conspiracy theorists say that lead was good for you. It ain't.
Not the conspiracy theory I listen to.
Right. But that turning of your mind to say, okay, yes, that is me, that was me, that happened, but now I am going to embrace those things because I cannot remove them from me. That this is going to be the way in which that people find their way through. And it's not an easy process. This is not an easy thing to do. This is the work of an entire lifetime.
I think, in a very simplistic way, we have to learn how to love ourselves.
Sure.
And when we go through, well, something that comes up a lot with people I work with, and that's come up a lot with me, is just innate self-worth.
Sure.
We, for whatever reason, don't, a lot of us don't have a lot of innate self-worth. And it doesn't seem like, even in my experience as a youth, like I just, you might have been told you're good and, like, oh, you can do anything, but you're also getting belittled and yelled at and shown over and over and over again, through all sorts of inputs, that maybe you aren't. And so it's easy for many people to develop a very low self-worth. And when you don't think very highly of yourself, you are more prone to do things, I think, that cause you harm.
Well, Christian,
Um,
that's marketing. That's all of marketing, is to show you you are not good unless you have this thing. Everything is telling you that.
For sure. Yeah, man, that's why I got off social media and everything, because I wanted less inputs making me feel like I wasn't doing well enough based off of someone else's standards. I'll tell myself I'm not doing well enough based off my own.
I could see it by the box that I'm living in that I am not doing well enough.
Um, but it's a lot of therapy. You're going through all these things that happened to you that made you feel a certain way about yourself and about other people and about life and the world and your potential. And um there's all these emotions, anger, sadness, regret, all these negative field emotions, right? And you were just trying to feel more love for yourself,
Mm,
which extends into love for other people. But then it's also like, you're not really gonna be able to, I think, feel a lot of love for yourself in a sincere way until you go through the process of forgiving yourself. And
mm,
forgiving yourself is a really complicated process because you're not always entirely sure what you're forgiving yourself for.
mm-hmm.
But at some point or another, I mean, and I say this because I have felt this way. And as we were saying, like we are one and the same, even though we're different, we're all part of the same. I don't think humans are that different than me. And if
No,
I have felt self-loathing in my life for distorted reasons, then I'm sure many other people have felt self-loathing. And finding ways to navigate and heal my self-loathing made it easier to accept other people,
sure.
not other people.
Well, if we do, we don't often do it, but if we take a little Chinese medicine 90-degree, a little right turn here, I'll put my blinker on and we'll dip in a TCM for a minute. Um, the metal element, which is associated with the lungs and the large intestine, and then psycho-emotionally, and which is associated with grief, letting go, guilt, right? These kind of like heavier emotions, if you will. The metal element, again, it's with the things that I just mentioned, it's also associated with one of the spirits. So the Chinese believe that we have kind of like 5 spirits wrapped into one. So we often use the term Shen or soul on here, but it's really more like a prism. It's refracted light. And so this is one of the 5 spirits. And this spirit is most associated with the physical body. In Chinese, they call it the Po, but we'll call it the kind of like the soma, your body. And I believe that, like, from my understandings of working with people and obviously our readings in various texts and reflections on those texts from more contemporary thinkers, that like the difficulty in letting go, the difficulty of guilt, of letting go of guilt, or we call forgiveness, right, is difficult because the body is most aware of its own nature, of, like you said, that it's finite, that it has an expiration date, that it is actively expiring. We are slowly expiring milk. Although I want to
Science
believe
day one.
that I'm getting sweeter before I get more sour. You know what I'm saying? But like that part of our soul, that part of our psyche, that part of our being has a hard time letting things go, because eventually, as you say, you see the world as you see yourself. It knows it too is going to have to be let go of. And so that is the very difficult part on a being level, on a physical level, on the human level, because it is reminded of its own finality. And so this practice of letting go regularly is hard. Is hard because we have to be reminded that we're gonna have to let this go too. And this is actually not, we don't do this very often, but this is just a natural moment right now. Eric and I on the next episode are going to cover the Tibetan practices for people who pass, and what you know, some of the prayers that you can say for them. And since we're on this subject right now, I want to say a rest in peace to my friend Dr. David J. Zeiger, who some people, you know, I share some patience with him, and he passed away peacefully last Saturday. He's a good friend of mine, a good practitioner of holistic and medicine. He was a DO. He delivered many babies. He helped heal many, many people. And so, you know, much love to my mentor and homie. But yeah, so metal element, soma, po, letting go, grief, forgiveness, and back where we started.
You know, when we first started talking about doing this podcast, again, we wanted to talk about kind of like therapy versus coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, I think what comes up a lot in the people I work with is trying to create a a simple understanding of your early narrative so that we don't have to linger on it for too long,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think we all have similar, I mean, again, I don't want to generalize too greatly because obviously people have very unique experiences in their lives. But we were all children at one point, let's say,
Absolutely.
regardless of what of the conditions in which we were raised or the resources we had available to us or the things we may have experienced, we were all young and impressionable. And things happened to us when we had states of less agency
Yeah.
and when we were more emotionally dependent on others for our psychological development. And we just model what we've seen. And if this
Yes.
is all we've seen, then this is what we know. And it just is what it is. Um, what I've seen as a challenge for some people is, we'll just say, let's talk about your relationship with your mom. And they'll say, oh, you know, like, oh, my mom, she was real hard on me about this, or, you know, she had a real problem with that. It's like, but, you know, but she did a really good job, you know, and like, you know, I'm not mad at her anymore. She did a really good job. And people don't, a lot of people I've worked with experience don't want to point fingers at people. Um, they don't want to blame other people, or it depends. It depends on who it is. But I mean, in family experiences, I've noticed like I've I've worked with people who are hesitant to point fingers at people.
Sure.
And I've had to tell them that sometimes you have to point the finger at someone so that you can stop unconsciously pointing the finger at someone. You have to, I don't ever want to necessarily blame people and like encourage a victim mentality, but it's like I have to be able to say, you did this, it impacted me in this way, and now that I can acknowledge it, I don't have to hold on to it anymore, and I can let go of it. Um, and I think that is part of the way that we transition from just going over the same shit, the same stories over and over and over again, without actually transforming them, is to navigate what it's like to actively place the blame so that you can acknowledge that you needed something different, so that you can then take the blame away and become your own guide, become your own parent.
Mm.
Um, I've used the work of Mark Wolin a lot in my own life, and with my clients quite a bit. He wrote a book called It Didn't Start With You.
Oh yeah, that's right. You remember that one?
Yeah. And one of the exercises one of the exercises you go through in that book is, you know, you write down your mom, you write down your mom's name, and you know, you say, when I was a little kid, my mom was like this. I wish that my mom had done blank and blank differently. I blame my mom for this and this. I blame my mom for that and that. I'm grateful for her for this and this. Just so that you can very simply itemize So that you don't have to bullshit yourself about pain that you had, that you didn't know how to process.
Hmm.
Like I was working with a client recently who really, really loves her mom, really loves her mom, but her mom also fucked her up and did a lot of terrible things to her when she was growing up. And she can't really process her own pain until she's able to acknowledge that even though she's not mad at her mom now, she was mad at her mom then and had no space within which to express that. And now it's literally taken hold within her body as a deep-rooted anxiety, which influences her communication and her intimacy, you know? So it's like being able to claim something, name it, so that you
Yeah.
can own it and
Yeah. And then let it go.
release it.
Yeah.
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 Um, but yeah, but we still haven't even really, all of this kind of still leans into the cathartic aspects still, cultivation. Um, I don't know that that's something that a therapeutic space can provide. I think they're different. They have a different energy to them.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think you need to be fully released before you can start doing the work of like rebuilding
Well, we would
yourself.
hope not, because
Yeah.
fully breaking something down when you're always incurring more is not possible. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like it would take a lifetime to get rid of a life to be,
Fair.
cathartic from a
Yeah.
lifetime. And so that's not the that but that's why we're saying what we're saying. What we're
Right.
saying is catharsis is important. You do have to, as you said, name it to own it so that you have something to work with so that you can release it and move forward from it, right? As opposed to just what they call generalized, and I'm using air quotes because I like to use them randomly, but this is actually appropriate. um, generalized anxiety disorder, when we work with people who have generalized anxiety disorder, it's only generalized because that is the thing or things often that are causing the anxiety have yet to be labeled. And sometimes they are somatic, right? They are physical. Their imbalances are off with their electrolytes or their blood or, exercise or whatever. And in other times, it's also things that have happened to them that haven't been processed that create this sense of like, I don't want to go in the water. I don't want to go in the water. I don't want to stay. I don't want to go deep. I want to stay up. I want to stay out. And so we, like you said, name it, own it, start to transform it.
I think the thing we're all most addicted to is the distorted perspective we have of ourselves, and we
Yeah.
do a lot of things to reinforce the distorted perspective
Yeah.
that we have of ourselves. Um, yeah, and so
Yes. I mean, that's right.
no,
We,
I know. I mean, it's kind of hard to move from there. It's because how do we create an undistorted picture of reality? How do we help someone create a non-distorted picture of themselves and of reality?
this will be the topic of our next meeting when you come on.
Okay.
We have, because that's an entire thing, and that's essentially that's what we're doing. I mean, that's what this podcast is doing. That's what you and I are doing when we work with patients. That's what you and I are doing. We work with each other. That's what when we work with our family members, when we work, and I don't mean work isn't like they're paying us to do stuff, but when we interact, what we're sharing, where we're sharing from, it's with that intention. And I don't want to shortchange it. We're an hour deep into this conversation at this point, and I don't want to bury it at
Yeah,
the
for
end.
sure.
And I want to come at it with that as our intention um, of emancipating this distorted self perspective. I think that will be a good place to pick up next time.
Well, no, I agree. And I think, just to say though that if we are really addressing this juxtaposition of therapy and coaching, of catharsis and cultivation. It really isn't a matter of verse, it's just a matter of and
Yeah.
and acknowledging that there's work that needs to be done. I think there's work that needs to be done from both ends, right? You cannot just be treated into health.
Yes.
You can be guided towards health, towards your own version of health, but you cannot be treated into health. And that's part of the big issue in helping people alchemize, is that it can't be done for you. You can have someone hold your hand while you're doing it for yourself, though.
So what you're saying, Christian, which is a very punny name for this next sentence, you're saying there are no saviors, just ourselves. Is that
That's
right,
exactly
Christian?
that's exactly right. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, you are welcome, my friend. Thanks for coming on today and chatting with me, brother.
Thank you, Daniel.
I
Yeah, I'm happy to keep this conversation going next time.
yeah, I think it's a great place to leave off on and to pick up next time. I do love ending on a little bit of ambiguity and a pun. I don't even know if that's a pun, but you know, I think people know what I meant. If you've made it to the end of the episode, your attention span is within the top 10% of human beings in the world. Fantastic. We give you one clap for hanging out with us. I will put, you know, Christian has a practice on the north side of Chicago for our Illinois folks who are interested in getting a hold of him. I'll put the links to his contact if you're interested in working with him, or you know, whatever, just checking out things that he does. You know, everybody knows what it is. Like, subscribe, comment. If you're on a YouTube, do your thing, share our work. Instagram, Gin and Tantra Podcast. Slide up in our DMs. We'll be happy to slide back up in yours. And everyone's just sliding everywhere like a slip and slide or something like that. As always, we want to remind people that we are brought to you by our motherfucking selves. We, you know, don't do any advertisement because this is a love project and a passion project. And this is definitely, you know, things that we live. And so we are just sharing things that we live and learn. And, you know, it's an opportunity for us to bring clarity to thoughts that we are having and to bring experiences that we are having that we believe are valuable, to share that with a greater audience. So if you feel that it's, you know, useful, beneficial for you, please feel free and obligated also to share with, you know, friends, family, loved ones, and enemies. Also, random people, spam them with our shit. It's all good. For Eric and Christian, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.